The views, comments, stories, and opinions shared within this podcast are my own or those of my guests, and in no way represent the views of the company or companies that I or we work for. All stories, events, and tales shared within this episode may or may not have happened in the manner in which they are told. They may or may not have even happened at all. The details have been changed to protect the innocent and the guilty alike. This is Squawk Ident.
Minimum 200, 100 above. 50, 40, 30, 20, 10. Retard.
Chicago O'Hare International Airport. Automated weather observation 1524 Zulu. Wind 320 at 05. Visibility 4. Light snow, mist. Sky condition scattered 800. Overcast 2100. Temperature 01 Celsius. Dew point -02 Celsius. Altimeter 3032. Remarks. Density altitude -1200.
You're listening to Squawk Ident, an aviation podcast dedicated to the journey and the challenges surrounding the life and career of Aviator Tony, his co-hosts, and his guests. Together we will explore the many pathways to an aviation profession, the realities of what a professional aviator can expect in today's marketplace, and we share many stories along the way. I'm your host, Aviator Tony, an airline pilot currently flying for a legacy airline with close to 20 years on the flight line. This is episode 60 of Squawk Ident, recorded on the 26th of October, 2020, from the Aviator Sound Studios from somewhere in Southern California. On today's show, I am very fortunate to be joined by my magnificent Squawk Ident flight crew members, Rob D. and Captain Roger. The three of us have been texting back and forth over the last few days because of a few aircraft accidents that have headlined aviation news. We aviators usually pay attention, close attention, when we hear of aircraft issues. Not because we like to chase fire trucks, but more so because any incident that occurs on the flight line is an opportunity to improve our understanding and knowledge on the best way to tackle an in-flight situation. We will discuss what we have learned from these incidences and how distractions on the flight deck can lead to some disastrous results. Plus, through some feedback from a loyal listener, a former guest actually, Captain John H., we will explore some of our favorite aviation films to hit the silver screen. I would first like to extend our heartfelt gratitude to Bozo and Captain Roger Victor for joining us on episode 59 of Squawk Ident, Aviation Puppet Master. We had a blast learning about Captain Roger Victor's journey, how he became an online pilot celebrity, and the influences in Bozo's life that shaped his passion for puppeteering. Thank you, Captain Roger Victor. And if you have not done so, check out the YouTube clips that we have posted from the Aviator Tony and Squawk Ident podcast YouTube page. And make sure you like, share, and subscribe to the channel. If you select the bell, you'll get notified on future videos from the show. As we are getting ready to push off the gate here, let's start off the show today by introducing one of my co-hosts. He is a former international and professional racquetball champion, a member of the 9G Club, an AMP and avionics tech, an RC aircraft commander, and a pickleball master, a commercial drone operator, and currently a 737 pilot for Legacy Airlines, the name we use here on the show as an alias to our employer, a U.S. mainline carrier. From his fortress of isolation, where the Mario Brothers are repairing leaks in the pipes but butt cracks are on display, from somewhere in Flower Mound, Texas, help me in welcoming back to the show, Mr. Rob D. Rob, how you doing?
I'm doing really good, Tony. How you doing?
Hey, I'm doing pretty good myself. So what the heck's going on with your busted pipes? I know you sent me some photos via text. What the heck?
All right, what's going on, right? Well, it's not as bad as it really looks. I mean, it wasn't a busted pipe, thankfully. It was just a leaking faucet. I have a one of those Moen faucet things that pull out of the fixture.
Oh,
and you
yeah,
can
the
rinse
shower
down
wand
pots and
thing.
Yeah, it's kind of like a shower wand. Well, the thing's like 20 years old, so where it bends all the time was starting to leak. So we hardly ever pulled the thing out to begin with. So anyways, it was starting to leak, but it's leaking, when it's inside the receptacle, it's leaking into the fixture and ends up going underneath the cabinet. Well, we hardly ever pull that thing out, so we never really noticed it leaking until it got so bad that now water, just a large amount of water, is now pouring out of that that leak when you turn it on. And my wife's like, "Hey, we've got water on the floor. What's going on?" So when we opened up the door, like a big rush of water came out, and the wood and everything's all wet and mushy. So that has to be replaced. It looks like it's been doing it for a little while. It's a little, say, moldy and icky down there.
Oh, yeah.
So anyway, I got the leak fixed today with a replacement part. So that's been kind of occupying my days, getting all that squared away. I've been gone for about a week. Been on vacation. Flew up north to help my mom, my parents clean out their basement to get ready for some renovations out there. So been kind of busy, but it's kind of nice to go visit family and see actually the fall colors up there in New England. Is really nice.
Oh yeah, I bet. I mean, this is the time that the leafers come out, isn't that right?
Yeah, it's really, really impressive, and I haven't been able to enjoy something like that in quite some time. I mean, I left the New England area when I joined the military back in '95, so we're pushing a little more than 20, almost 30, 25 years ago now. So that used to be an everyday occurrence up until every year occurrence up until then. So getting back to it, it was really spectacular. I think the colors were just popping. The sun angle was perfect with this time of year, and so I was able to enjoy that. And my brother-in-law has a boat. We went out on the bay and did some deep sea fishing. Caught a whole bunch of blackfish. So it was a good time. Played some golf. Golf courses are fantastic this time of year. So, all in all, it was a great trip. Good to be back. Zero flying except for the commuting back and forth.
Yeah.
So that's good to have too on a vacation.
Yeah. And how was the commute? Were the flights full as I've seen they've been?
Well, people talk about that. In this case, it wasn't. I mean, I was flying into an area that you have to quarantine when you get there. So, I guess I broke the rule. But
allegedly.
Yeah, it's nonsense, man. But as far as the flights, I had a whole row to myself going up to Boston, and on the way back, I chose to fly out of Providence, which has the same kind of rules as the Massachusetts area as quarantine. I was leaving the state, so it wasn't too much of a big deal. But the flight, I had a layover in Charlotte, or change planes in Charlotte, and then Charlotte to Dallas. And both flights, I had the whole row to myself. So it wasn't too bad. It was about 80% full, but just luckily, just where I sat in the exit row, I had the whole row to myself.
Yeah.
So it's pretty good.
And seeing your mom and your family, that's got to be all worth it.
It was awesome. Just really got to spend some quality time with them. Usually when I go, it's with my wife and kids, and it's always just we always have something going planned out, so we're always kind of hustle and bustle, and you never really get to just sit down, like watch a movie or chit chat. We're always kind of just moving around, and that's one of the things I don't like about that whole area is you're always driving, you're always on the go.
Yeah,
I just feel like you're always rushed, and it was nice to just get there, hang out. Even my mom made an apple pie while we're there. So that was kind of neat. I mean, that's how it was. Pie. It was fantastic, man. So, yeah.
Well, kudos to you, man. That you had the opportunity to do that. That's wonderful. That's absolutely wonderful.
Yeah, it was good.
Yeah. Well, also joining us today is another exceptional aviator. He is a professional CFI, II, and MEI flight instructor. He is a former Embraer 145 airline pilot, a King Air flight instructor, a Falcon 2000 commander, a corporate operator as well. He joins us today from his mobile studios from the 7th floor of the Embassy Suites in sunny Orlando, Florida. Please help me in welcoming back to the show our very own Captain Roger. Captain, How you doing?
I'm doing all right, Tony. How are you guys?
Doing well. So you've been flying quite the opposite of Rob. You've been flying quite a bit. I mean, have you even been home for more than a day? What the heck's going on with your schedules?
Well, fortunately, I have been home for the past week. So that was the upside. The downside is that's pretty much been the only days I've had off for the entire month.
Wow.
And I have no days off for the remainder of the month either. So
Yeah.
I have, I live in California. However, I've spent more time in the Eastern time zone this month than I have actually at home.
Yeah. And that's a bit of an adjustment too, isn't it?
It's definitely an adjustment. It was still, even today, I was kind of thinking about it, like where I look at my watch, because I don't know if I'm in the minority or majority. I don't actually change my watch when I travel. And so my watch is still on Pacific time.
Yeah.
But I look at my watch and it's hard for me to believe that where the time goes. It's like, because my watch will say noon and it's already 3:00 out here. And I don't think it takes me several days before I can actually kind of adjust to that.
Yeah.
I guess it's almost like the days move faster out here because I don't know. Maybe it's my watch. I'm not really sure.
Well, also this time of year definitely makes a big difference. I know, it's been getting darker pretty early, and
yeah,
which it's good if you're someone like me that unfortunately has no choice but to do a lot of red eyes in my schedule. So when you do a red eye and you land and it's still dark, it plays a trick on you. So you can get to the hotel, make sure all the curtains are closed, and that hanger with the clips on it has shut the curtains tight, so not a beam of light comes in, because of course if you forget to do that, as soon as the sun comes up, you get that beam of light hit you right in the face, and
it'll make it into the room. That's for sure.
So that is a benefit, but at the downside, you're right. It's like sometimes it feels like, well, I'm only flying in the dark. It's like, what's the sun? Where is the sun? With the East Coast, I don't change my watch either. I leave it on Pacific time. Depending on the schedule that I'm flying, I try to keep to my time zone so that I don't have jet lag. But yes,
right.
Pilots do get jet lag, and it's a very serious thing. That's why we have rest requirements and rest rules, and the FAA has all that spelled out under FAR 117. Anybody can look that up and go through the regulations and see how many hours of rest a pilot needs between flights, between days, and something we take very seriously as aviators, because as you know, if you're drowsy in the cockpit, it could lead to disastrous results. So, and you've been flying quite a bit.
Which is great for all of you guys in the airline world. We have no FAR 117 here in the Part 91 world.
So in Part 91, you are a commercial pilot. What are your time limits? Are you back to what we used to have, 8 hours of rest between, so many hours of flying?
Compensatory rest and all that stuff.
Yeah. What does a Part 91 pilot deal with?
There are no rules.
None.
There are no rules for Part 91. No. Now, typically, it is true that there are no rules, but it's also Part 91, and so we also have a lot more flexibility in flat out being able to say no.
Yeah.
I mean, there is nothing that says that we have to go other than, whoever has hired us. In the Part 91 world, really you're flying for private owners because there's no for hire or on-demand charter kind of stuff, because that's very different. But the Part 91, we're pretty much just to the owners, but it also gives us the ability to educate them and say, look, we cannot do this. Now, I'm fortunate enough that I've never actually had that problem. While yes, there are no rules, at the same time, I've never had an issue where that becomes a big recurring issue. There are times where we will have very short nights, sometimes less than what was known as reduced stress before the 117, that it will be less than 8 hours, but that's never something that's going to continually roll onto itself over and over again. So typically fatigue is not so much of an issue for lack of rest. Sometimes your days can go on for a long time. just last week, I had a day that was about 16 hours. And,
Wow.
But then I had a week off. So
I see. So,
it's just a different type of flying.
Yeah, and it's if you come up across this schedule issue where you think, you and the other pilots say, well, that's we're not going to be able to do that because you don't want us to be tired. The owners are usually okay with that, or do they just find other pilots? Because I couldn't imagine someone wanting to fly that much under a private.
Yeah, I can't really even give you a great answer to that question. Everything is going to vary from owner to owner. However, I can't imagine any scenario for any person that I've ever worked for. If I had to have said that, it would have just been, no, we're not going to do that. And for them to actually find another pilot, I guess they could do that. However, they're going to, anybody pretty much knows that that's going to be really difficult to find somebody that kind of short notice who's going to be able to do that, who's typed in the appropriate type of airplane and who's available.
Yeah.
And like I say, like you said, nobody really is going to be flying that much, because if they're on the airplane, that means that they've had a really short night as well. And most of these people are not. They're not going to run their schedules like that.
Right. So, and that makes sense. You don't get worked as much as, say, an airline pilot would on the private side of things or on the charter side of things. So.
Right, because we're only flying one person. I mean, you guys are taking up one group of people, 150 people to one destination, and then you're turning around and taking a completely different set of people on the way out. Whereas we're keeping this, we're all going together. If we fly on flight on leg one, those are the same people who are going to be flying on leg two and leg three of that trip.
Yeah.
And so we're all in it together.
Yeah. And that's I didn't know that. I thought you had some kind of rest regulations even under Part 91, but yeah, that's very interesting to hear. So you've been flying a lot, but you've also been spending quite a bit of time on layers. I mean, I know the last show you had a week at your destination layover there in the the Caribbean?
Yeah, I was in the Caribbean for 6 days.
Oh, the travesty.
It was pretty terrible.
Yeah.
Get my depressed voice here. It was actually really laid back. There's not, with the cruise ships not sailing and travel, obviously pretty low. It was a very laid back. There are pros and cons to that, but it was actually fairly quiet out there.
Yeah. I know you sent me some pictures of those beautiful beaches and the famous beach there. Where normally it's full of people trying to reach up at those airplanes as they're landing, flying overhead. And not only were there no people, there were no airplanes.
I was the only soul on the entire beach. I will say that when we left, there were some people hanging out at the fence that were waving to us as we left last Sunday.
They had a little excitement. A plane was actually leaving.
The plane. It's actually that's pretty cool. Well, a lot's been going on my end of the world. We had that wonderful episode that we were all very excited about with Captain Roger Victor for episode 59. We all had a great time. And I believe he did too. He sent a very nice message to me saying that he had a great time and would love to do it again sometime. So that's very nice that he took the time to send that to us. So good job, guys. I think that was a really good show. This show, we don't have an interview today because of scheduling conflicts. We had about 3 or 4 people that were interested in lining up, but because of scheduling conflicts, and it's been a while since the last show, which was on the 15th, I believe. So I wanted to get one out. And the reason I wanted to do one with the both of you was because I wanted to get your input on distractions in the cockpit or on the flight deck. We've all been distracted. Not just in aviation, but in the world, while driving, while performing a task, while cooking. How many times have we burned something because we got distracted? And it happens. It's human behavior. It's natural. But in our profession, we have to minimize those distractions. That's why we have SOPs or standard operating procedures. And what brought on this topic for me was what's been happening in the news. And we're going to get to that here in a little bit on the show. And it all kind of relates to what's been going on in my neck of the woods. I had a little bit of vacation as well in the month of October, which was kind of cool. What did I do during that vacation? Did I go anywhere? Absolutely not. I stayed home, painted all the interior doors of the house, took them all off, took all the hardware off, and set up a little spray booth in the backyard and got my paint sprayer going and sprayed all the doors and then rehung them. And that was a day. And then I spent about 4 days pressure washing the house, painting the trim, painting the house. And my house is now completely painted. And there was a lot of time spent on a ladder. And who needs a gym when you're doing these kind of jobs around the house? So that was good. And then we thought, well, maybe we'll do a drive up the coast and not completely burn my vacation. And we got the phone call saying, "Hi, kids, we're coming to visit." And so the in-laws were here. And we got to do our best to stay isolated. The second I found out that my in-laws were coming over and they're in their 80s, I went out and got a COVID test just for peace of mind. And I'm COVID negative. I've never had it. The antibodies came back nope, no sign. So we knew, okay, if I don't have it, then obviously nobody else in the house has it because we're all been home for about 2 weeks and not really been out and about. So we had family over and we went to go see uncles and aunts and had outdoor picnics and barbecues. And so we've been busy, between the housework and the family. And then it was time for me to go back to work. And that was kind of weird. When you go back to work after being off for close to 3 weeks, your first leg in the flight deck can be a little intimidating. It's not quite like riding a bike. These are skills that we have to maintain. That's why there's recurrent training in our industry. What about the two of you? Whenever you go on a vacation, what are those first few legs like?
Yeah, I feel the same way. I like you said, flying's a diminishable skill. It's to me, it's funny. It's like, as far as like operating the aircraft, it's like I know, like my hands know where they need to go, but like my brain is slow to connect, what I'm supposed to be doing with what I need, what my hands doing. I don't know how to really explain it. It's almost like an outer body experience, but things are slow. It's just kind of like mushy, even like the radio calls, you hear them, but you're like, whoa, that was for us. I need to say something back. I don't know. It takes me a couple flights to get back into the saddle again. I mean, I feel fully safe and confident that that I'm supposed to be up there, and I don't want to give the wrong impression that we're unsafe or anything like that. But it's kind of nice to come back and to get to that point and know that you totally forgot about everything up here because you've been on a vacation. Because I mean, when you're in this industry, it's go go go, and you're constantly getting updates with operating procedures and the they're always changing things on you. You got to stay up to date. You got your training going on.
Yeah.
So there's always things that don't particularly focus on the cockpit stuff, but the company stuff that you got to kind of keep up with, union stuff, and current events and all that stuff. A lot of stuff, so to speak.
Yeah, the emails, they pile up quick, don't
emails. So yeah, and they make changes to everything every now and then. So you're staying connected that way. And then when you go on vacation, I make sure I leave my iPad at home. I don't even bring that with me. Usually, like when I commute and stuff like that, I'll watch movies on it and everything. But I didn't bring it with me at all. Just left that at home. So, the only thing I have on my iPhone is, my company app to check messages, but I just left that alone. I didn't look at that once. So anyway, that's kind of me. I don't have to go back to work till Wednesday, and
Oh,
I'm on reserve. So and there's no flying to be to be done. I mean, I've been on
really?
reserve since the beginning of the month. There's 0 open time, and
Hmm.
I flew 1 day trip this month, and that was it. So things are kind of slow
And
right now in
is
the
the reserve
DFW
line
ramp.
all you can hold with your seniority right now?
I bid it purposely for the because I had vacation. Just the value that I get out of it is better than actually flying online and having to actually physically fly the amount of hours you get paid. So um, it's more efficient that way. However, from the bidding standpoint, because of all of our companies' furloughs and everything like that, I went from bidding 50%, where I was like 53%. Now I'm like 93%. So
93%. So you're at the bottom of the list.
very bottom of the list.
Yeah, not the top. Yeah, so that's gives a lot of people
Yeah.
confusion. Oh, you're at 93%. Yeah, 93%
93%.
of the entire
The
group.
from the top.
Yeah.
I'm all the way at the bottom.
Yeah.
So I was still able to get a line, and I think that's understandable, because I think all the smart people will want to just be on reserve, because you most likely you won't fly and you're going to get the guarantee for the month. Well, for me, I have to actually fly to make the money. So I'd rather do that. So anyway, that's where I'm at. That's how I feel about all that.
Yeah, these schedules have really created quite the stir in our industry. I know even Roger was talking about how he wasn't flying for so long, and now all of a sudden he's got flying coming out of his ears, really. And in a Part 91 world, that actually sounds like business as usual, right, Raj? That's pretty much what you're used to.
Yeah, it's a very different animal. And kind of going back to the guy, what you guys were just talking about in terms of vacation, I used to feel the same way that you guys were kind of describing when it comes to, I just had 2 weeks off for vacation, and now I'm back, and it's just a little bit different. You feel a little bit uneasy, just like Rob had said, not nearly to the degree like it's unsafe or anything.
Right.
And now I would go go the other way, because I don't feel that way at all anymore, because that kind of became the norm. I mean, it was normal for me to go a week or 2 or sometimes even 3 weeks without flying. And now I think for me, because it becomes normal, you're a little or a lot more comfortable with it, number one. And number two, I think that the complacency also is decreased that way as well, because you know that this is the normal. You know that, hey, I'm used to stepping back in and not having been, familiar with it on a 1 leg, 2 leg, 3 leg day after day after day after day for a 4-day. This is what we do. But then I would say that there's probably a little bit less complacency, because I can also speak, I'll only speak for myself, that when you're doing the same thing and running the exact same checklist, especially at the regionals, 3 or 4 times a day, 16 to 17 days a month, that checklist, let's face it, gentlemen, that checklist is memorized.
Yeah, sure.
And it's not nearly, not to say that we don't have those checklists memorized, but at the same time, not nearly to the extent as that they were at the airlines. And so it's just a different feeling. That's the norm in different flying environments, just specifically more towards the 91. But there's a whole lot of difference in the 91 world. But it was normal to not fly for a week or 2 all the time. That's what we knew. That's where our comfort level was. And so I think that that's just a little bit different depending on the type flying environment that you happen to be in.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. And for me, it was kind of weird to get back to it after 3 weeks off. I don't think I've had 3 weeks off from flying for years. I have a habit of spreading out my vacation. So I'll do a week here where I need it and try to turn it into a longer vacation, and then I have a week over there where I need it, and I try to turn it into a longer vacation. We rarely actually
Same here.
take trips, because so why would I need so many weeks off in a row? This particular instance, we were supposed to go to Italy this year with the family and meet up with family over there and stay there, and that obviously got canceled. So I just kind of left the vacation where it was and figured, hey, we're going to get work done on the house that we've been talking about for a while. And the opportunity really presented itself. The universe spoke, and the temperatures dropped below the hundreds here at the house. And I had like 4 days where they were maybe in the high 70s at the most. And in those 4 days is when I was up there on ladders and on the roof and painting trim and using paint sprayers and masked up with 3M masks and goggles and paint suits and stuff, because that stuff gets everywhere. And sure enough, the day I finished and the next day it got back up into the 90s. So, hey, it just all worked out. But
Good
getting
timing.
back into the airplane was definitely, a challenge to get back into it. But like you guys said, like Rob was mentioning, you feel kind of slower in your responses, your muscle memory. So you're reaching for controls with a little bit more forethought, maybe. But that first leg was great, and I flew with a captain that I recognized. We had flown together about 2 years prior, and we recognized each other right away, said hello, and I remembered that he was into like horseback archery, and he remembered where I lived, and so it was nice to have that connection. Sometimes you fly with someone and go, have we flown together? I don't know, maybe, I guess. But that wasn't the case here. Well, we had a flight coming from Philly to Los Angeles, which was our come home leg or go home leg. And that was last night. And so after doing a short leg into Philadelphia, 3 hour sit, then we had the Philly to LA leg, and it was the go home leg. And in the pre-flight briefing, it was my leg to fly. The captain said, well, what are any threats? And I said, go home leg. I said, you need to catch a commuter flight. So you're eager to get there. We're crossing the country, and there's a little bit of weather that we have to contend with. A little bit of mountain wave was reported over the Colorado area. So anything that can go wrong is going to go wrong. And I said, so with that said, we're going to have a safe flight. And we went on with the brief, and we kind of chuckled because this is like Murphy's Law. This is what happens. Yeah. So we get to the airplane, and, the airplane had been sitting there for maybe about an hour, and we get to the gate, and first thing we're doing, I just got back in from my walk around, and the number one flight attendant says, hey, we need water and juice. The catering came and they left, and we don't have any water and juice, and we need water minimum, but we'd like to have those two for first class. And so, okay, there's a phone call, right? So, oh yeah, we'll send it back out. While we're sitting there at the gate, we get an ECAM message, the engine, or was it electronic crew alerting message display, or ICAS for some aviators out there. And this,
thingy.
It was a kind of a nuisance message, but we had to have it cleared. So now we're calling maintenance. Stop what I'm doing, call maintenance, have them come out, tell them what's going on. They came, they reset a couple computers, and that went away. And then we just kept getting distracted. So the normal flow of things on the go home leg was interrupted continuously for those 45 minutes that we normally take while the passengers are boarding to set up the cockpit or the flight deck as is required. But we still ran our checklist. We still did our flows, and we maintained strict adherence to making sure that nothing got missed. After pushback, it was a very short taxi. If any of you are familiar with Philadelphia, the Legacy Airlines terminal is relatively close to that particular runway that we were taking off from. So, we briefed that, it's going to be a relatively short taxi. Let's take care of all our control checks once we push off the gate before we even move. That way we can concentrate on taxi. And we never got our final numbers. So what are final numbers? Final numbers are our last weight and balance. So we have the gate agent that sends how many passengers are on the plane. We have the rampers that send what the final cargo load numbers are. The fuelers, they have put the fuel in and we sent that to them. That's our responsibility. So how many pounds of fuel we have on the airplane. And all these other departments that send all these numbers into the computer, once those numbers are in, it's an all automated system and it sends a message to the cockpit, and we get out of our printer in the cockpit our final numbers or our weight and balance or our closeout, whatever you want to call it. And we never received it. So, okay, now we're taxiing, relatively short taxi. Are you ready to go, Legacy? No, we're not. We don't have our final numbers. All right, turn here, turn there. And we had to get out of line and, park, set the parking brake. Let's make a few phone calls. So now we're on the radio, calling the load planner and saying, hey, we didn't get our numbers. Oh, we sent them to you. We didn't get them. Well, we sent them to you. Well, let's check the printer. No, we didn't get them. So we had to then go on our EFBs, our electronic flight bag, our tablet, and we had to go through an app that we have to see, well, let's see what's in the computer, because if it's there, we can then verify the numbers, and if we do all that, we can go, and that's what we ended up doing. Distraction. So by the time we're in the air, we're passing through 10,000 feet, and we both kind of stopped what we were doing, which was we were just doing, the captain was doing his flow through 10,000 feet, and I usually do a verification of what we call our displays. So I'm checking, oil and electronics and pressurization, just because at 10,000 feet, if you got to come back, you can easily just turn around. So it's a habit. When the captain's doing his thing, that's my trigger to do my thing. And we stopped and we never got our progress report, our flight prog. And just like when you're a private pilot, you fill out a flight plan, whether that's VFR or IFR, and you put waypoints and checkpoints and how much time it should take you and how much fuel you should have at each checkpoint and what are the winds. And well, we do that. You do that from day one as a private pilot, and you do it all the way through when you're a senior captain at a mainline carrier or cargo carrier or whatever. So that report never came out. Again, didn't come from the printer. So now captain's like, well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to call dispatch on our crew phone, and it's your aircraft, your radios. So he goes into his EFB, since we have a Wi-Fi connection on most of our aircraft over at Legacy Airlines. He used this crew phone to contact dispatch. And I could hear him, off on the side saying, hey, this is Captain so-and-so, we're on flight, this and this. We never got our prog report, and we had to use an alternate method to pull out an electronic weight and balance. What's going on? Come to find out that over in dispatch, they had selected the ACARS off for our flight. At least that's what they told them. So we weren't getting any of the information that we were needing for the flight. So he had turned it on. He apologized. He goes, oh, I'm sorry about that. So he turned it on, apologized, and pushed over a new flight progress report so we can keep track of the fuel burn and time and all that stuff. So distraction. So what I got out of that was an idea for today's show. Let's talk about how distractions can easily find themselves into the flight deck and potentially make your job a much more harder. Roger, you deal with distractions, I'm sure, quite a bit. How can you think of a couple examples and how you handle them?
Well, we do. All right. It's kind of an interesting topic. Lots of things are kind of going through my mind as you were describing that. The first of which is, you guys are so spoiled.
That's what he said.
You guys are pilots. You guys are pilots. That's all you do.
Yeah, we are.
You guys talk about all these
totally
distractions from the pilot standpoint. You want to talk about distractions, man? You all you have is this stuff that's happening up on the flight deck, and I think I mostly just kind of made me laugh about how spoiled you guys are in the 121 world. Kind of getting back to the topic, distractions they're an everyday fact of life. Quite frankly, I guess as I was kind of just alluding to, I think that maybe they're a little bit more common in the environment that I'm flying at, simply because we don't have any flight attendants on our airplane. A lot of people do not also. Some do, but most do not.
Yeah.
And so, our jobs encompass dispatch, our jobs encompass flight attendants, our job encompasses weathermen, our job encompasses piloting as well. And anytime there's anything coming from the back, I mean, mostly the distractions that we have are the people in the back. Hey, how come the internet's not working? Or they're
I'm on short final. What are you talking about? Get back there.
They're up in the galley.
First world problems. I get it.
Yeah.
It's like, well, where are the napkins?
Yeah.
Well, where is this? Well, where is that? And oh, by the way, how come the internet's not working?
Did you fix that yet?
And so sometimes I'm IT. I'm trying to fix the internet, or I'm trying to troubleshoot and what's going on. And we have some other things that for passenger comfort, and that is also under our purview because there is nobody else. You guys were worried about your progress reports. That's great. The internet's not working.
The internet's not working. Why isn't it working, son?
But I think that obviously the important part of this is that all of those things have to still be managed, no matter what your responsibilities are to making sure that you're filling out your progress report for dispatch to make sure that they have their fuel burn down to the pound, or whether it's trying to figure out why the internet's not working for the guy who needs to check his emails in the back. All those things still have to be managed because in the end, the final authority and safety of that flight obviously begins and ends with the two pilots up front. Yeah. Especially where on our operation, because we do have a fair amount more responsibilities to the people in the back. Positive transfer of controls, like you were talking about. Hey, you've got the airplane and you have the radios, and that's the same thing where we're at. Depending on who's flying and who kind of knows more. Typically, I'm with the exception of kind of what the chief pilot, I probably know more about what's going on than the rest of our group. So it's hey, it's your airplane and your radios, because I got to get up and I got to go into the back and I got to start playing around with.
I got to reset the router. The modem's acting up again.
Or dig out more napkins from storage or whatever it might happens to be. But in the end, all of these things have to be managed, and making sure that somebody's always flying the airplane, somebody's always paying attention to what's going on, because I'm sure that this is probably where you're going to go in this episode. If you look at pretty much any incident or any accident, it's never one mistake that's going to cause that. It's a series. And if you're able to just break that chain at any point, you're probably going to be able to dodge the bullet, if you will. But you always have to make sure that somebody is managing and not dealing with the distraction, because otherwise that's when you end up with that stream to disaster. Yeah,
we used to call it CRM, but now all the airline companies out there, including Legacy, calls it the threat and error management model. It's also known as the Swiss cheese model, and the principle is you have these layers or barriers that are there to protect you from an aircraft accident or incident, or something to distract you to the point of a catastrophic event. And in those layers or barriers, there are holes like Swiss cheese, and sometimes things get through those barriers, and hopefully there's one barrier are the pilots. Obviously that's the first barrier, and then the second barrier is the procedures, the standard operating procedures, the manuals that you're supposed to comply with, your knowledge base. And then there's another barrier of ATC, and another one's dispatch, and another one's your flight attendant crew or passengers in a Part 91 that might be in the back that could, if something went wrong, they could assist you by going, I hear this or I see this. And there's so many barriers, and hopefully they'll be trapped by the time they go through all these layers. We also have something called the ABCs. This is a newer model that they've recently been teaching us here on the airline side of things. And the ABCs are all about how you assess a situation, that's going wrong, that your distraction might lead to something that you didn't catch. So you assess it or you discover it. Once you do that, you balance your barriers. That's the B. And then the C is communicate. You want to communicate with your fellow pilot, with ATC, with whoever is responsible for the safety of that flight. And the final one, the ABCs, the S, is your standard operating procedures. And so they're teaching us this new method. It's in conjunction with the threat and error management model, or the TEM. We now have the ABCs to help stop issues from getting missed, that weak link in the chain, as Roger mentioned. Now, Rob, as a former Czech airman, a current 737 pilot, what have you seen or experienced that also can contribute to the discussion of distractions on the flight deck?
There's been many in my experience, but just recently I had one flying into Sacramento last month. I may have talked about it in a previous episode, but all in a nutshell, we were descending into Sacramento, and the California fires were smoking everything up. So the visibility in Sacramento was below like 2 miles. I think it was like 1.5 miles in smoke.
Wow.
So it was really thick smoke, and we were just descending into it, and we just come over we just got onto over I guess the mountain range there, and we were cleared for the LNAV VNAV approach. So we were still at like 12,000 feet. So in the 737, once you get cleared for the approach, you can go ahead as long as the vertical guidance and lateral guidance is captured by the autopilot and the flight guidance computer. You can just set the minimums on the altitude selector, and the aircraft will follow the the path all the way down to the runway using automation, and it's great. We all talk about it. Autopilot is great for kind of dialing down the amount of things you need to monitor. You can just sit back and just manage the aircraft and make sure it's making the crossing restrictions and the airspeeds, and all you have to do is configure the aircraft, and once it's lined up, turn the autopilot off and land the airplane. Well, when we were cleared for the approach, we were cleared to a different point that we were expecting to go to. So we had to reprogram the FMC or the FMS, and extract the proper fix out of the database. Well, when the captain went to do that, since he was a pilot monitoring, which is the person that handles all that stuff, he accidentally selected the wrong fix. And when that happened, it dumped all the information that the autopilot was tracking. So the autopilot reverted back to a basic pitch and lateral mode. So it just basically maintained whatever descent rate it had and whatever heading it was on, in basic lateral mode. So it really wasn't following anything at all. And I'm the flying pilot, so it's my job to keep the airplane from hitting the ground. And you were still at 12,000 feet and descending. So, there's plenty of altitude to play with, although we just passed, the, 8,000, 9,000 foot mountain peaks behind us.
Yeah.
But we were descending into the smoke, and it got really, really busy up there really quick, because I needed, within a relatively short period of time, I needed that information displayed so I can stay on the approach. And the captain was having a hard time getting that data programmed properly in the FMS. So I was really close to saying, calling ATC and saying, all right, we lost the data. Can you give me an altitude and a heading to fly so that we can get ourselves back together again? But and I'm sitting there and I'm, just really, really fighting the urge to help the captain, with the FMC.
Right.
I saw what he did wrong, but I really needed to focus on, aviate, fly the airplane, and keep the airplane going in the right direction and keeping the airplane away from the ground. So it was tough, and that was a big distraction. And once we got, so and the other thing was, you kind of relax, I think, a little bit when the automation's taking the airplane over. It's going to fly the altitudes, it's going to fly the airspeeds. It automatically does all that stuff for you. It's going to fly the headings, and then when all that stuff is gone, all of a sudden, boom, you got like three things you need to refocus on again. Not so much airspeed, altitude, and heading, but you need to make sure that from a procedure point of view, you're at least going to come close to following those things. So so and then all that stuff was lost, so I had to like reorientate myself with where the airplane was on the approach, what was the actual next fix that we were coming up to, because all that stuff dropped out, and just kind of keep the airplane going where it needed to go, and just hopefully the captain can get everything back when you needed it. And that was a huge distraction. So I mean, it's stuff like that that can progress to an aircraft incident or an aircraft accident, or you can violate an FAR or a clearance or something like that. So those are the times where the distractions are though you can learn from them, but holy mackerel, you really have to, you really have to, revert to your training of aviate, navigate, communicate, pilot flying, pilot monitoring, what are the jobs you got to do, and focus on keeping that airplane out of the dirt, because things happen, like you said, it happens quickly. Just as fast as that plane, that database dropped out, is as fast as things will go wrong, in other areas of the flight. So
and that's really why we have so many rules governing what we can and can't do on the flight deck. I know a lot of people think, well, all you do is push the takeoff button on the autopilot, plane flies itself, and you guys just drink coffee and read the Wall Street Journal and USA Today and all this stuff. And it's like, oh my God, you couldn't be further from the truth. Now, when things are going easy, you're at cruise, like that flight I just conducted last night, and it's 5.5 hour flight time. So that's 6 hours in that airplane. That was the second leg of the day. And, you stop and think, wow, we got hours of boredom, really. Yeah. But if you allow yourself to get distracted up there by doing something that is taking too much of your attention, that's not right. And there are plenty of rules. You're not supposed to be up there on another electronic device other than the one the company issues you, and you should only be looking at things that are pertinent to the flight. And we were looking at radar, and we were chasing different altitudes for turbulence and trying to keep it as smooth as possible. So we kept pretty busy. But when there's not much going on, and like Roger had alluded to earlier, saying, you guys have a checklist and you do 4 legs and it's the same checklist and you guys memorize that and it's day in, day out. Yeah, you absolutely get used to doing it, muscle memory, vocal memory, and things are just like everything's going to plan. It can be a little monotonous and tedious, and we do have a little extra time to kind of catch up on things and have a conversation in the cockpit, which is what I prefer. But sometimes just want some quiet time, but all of a sudden something happens, ding, and you're like, oh crap, what's it doing? Right? And these are the experiences that we've shared. There are also events that have happened recently in the news that, we're not going to sit here and assume we understand what happened. That always happens when the NTSB reports come out after an aircraft accident, that we finally get what the NTSB or the FAA has deemed as the causation of a particular accident or incident. Well, last week we had an aircraft slide off the runway. We had it's kind of freakish weather. We've got hurricanes coming up from the Gulf.
Yeah.
We've got unusually high
It's
temperatures.
39 degrees in Dallas right now.
You've got the super
39.
cold. They had like 6 inches of snow the other day in the Northwest. Well, it made me do a little bit of homework, and here I am looking at a website that I haven't looked at before. It's called Seahafer News. I have not heard of this. It's one of those Wisconsin names. But from seahafernews.com, I'll put a link in the show notes. Commercial jet skids off the runway at Central Wisconsin Airport. Now, Mosinee is a small airport that the commuters fly in and out of, usually out of Chicago. I've been there a few times myself. This article was posted from State News on October 22nd of 2020. And it says that the officials at Central Wisconsin Airport at Mosinee say no passengers were injured when a commercial, well, I guess they meant to say jet, skidded off the runway Tuesday night. It was an American Eagle flight from Chicago that got stuck in the snow while it was trying to land. Passengers were held on the plane for about 90 minutes before they were shuttled to the terminal. One passenger says the landing wasn't rough, and he didn't even realize what had happened until he looked out the window. So, what happened? You know, we can only assume and speculate at this point, but we do know that the weather conditions were that it was snowing. It was the first major snow of the season. So you know that there's hopefully de-icing or anti-icing going on both the surfaces of the airport and the aircraft that are there getting ready to take off. It's a relatively small airport, relatively short runways, nothing too crazy. So if the landing, the witness said, was quite normal, more than likely what happened was once the aircraft slowed to a stop, it probably hydroplaned at some point and slid because of either black ice or snow or slush or hydroplaning off the runway and got stuck. And it doesn't take much to have an aircraft that, I think they're flying either, it's probably an Embraer 145 going into Mosinee. What is it, landing at about 42,000 pounds? Don't quote me on those numbers. It's been a long time, but yeah.
41,226 is a 140.
Was that max landing weight? Yeah, 41,226. Yeah.
I don't know why I remember that
these
one.
numbers we were supposed to memorize and limitations.
43,659 or 8, something like that for 140. I don't know. I can't.
145. Yeah. So let's just say they're landing around 40,000 pounds, and if one wheel gets off that pavement and into the mud that's wet, saturated, or snow, it's gonna dig in, and you're done. You're gonna have to get towed out of there or whatnot. And so it makes sense that the passengers were there until they found a bus that could come and pick them up and take them to the terminal. So what happened? We don't know, but possibly there's a lot that can be said here. I've had a situation where I've had sliding in an aircraft, landing with what was unreported freezing rain. We've talked about that in an earlier episode of the show. It was one of my last flights at Sandpiper, actually. Woke me up. Woke us both up, actually. So distractions happen.
Yeah.
And if this was an isolated incident, which I'm sure the report in the end will probably show that, they just had an unreported black ice or something that they didn't know about and would cause the aircraft to slide. But only a few days later, a similar incident happened. This time it wasn't snow, but it was what is being reported as an aircraft overrun. This from simpleflying.com. American Eagle flight Embraer 145 runs off the runway in the Bahamas. This was a report from Chris Lowe on October 24th. And I'll put the link in the show notes. Today at approximately 11:56 local time, an American Eagle Embraer 145 LR operated as a flight AA4194 overran the runway shortly after landing in Freeport, Bahamas. Details are scarce, but it has been reported that all the passengers and crews are safe. The incident details include that the American Airlines flight from Miami to Freeport overran the runway just before noon on the 24th, and it actually operates the aircraft as an American Eagle service. The aircraft had 25 passengers on board, 3 crew members, and all were okay. Now, there are plenty of photos of this particular incident out there on the interwebs. And as you can see from one of the photos that I was looking at in particular, they showed the skid marks towards the end of the runway, these pair of black skid marks that continue on as the aircraft goes from centerline off to the side of the runway. Now, whether that's a malfunction that happened on this aircraft, because the aircraft is equipped with anti-skid and anti-locking braking, that I think it was at 40 knots wheel speed that it kicks off or something like that, or 35 knots wheel speed. So you have to be relatively slow.
It's 30 knots or 25 knots.
Yeah, something really low. You're really slow before that anti-skid deactivates. So at that point, if you slam on the brakes, it's not going to leave these long skid marks as these photos have shown. The article goes on saying, unfortunately, there's that aircraft, was just damaged. The main gears collapsed. You can see from the photos that they're out in the dirt in a ditch, and both main gears have collapsed, and they evacuated the aircraft via the emergency exit and the front exit. So we will have to wait until we see what the NTSB report, probably a year from now, comes up with as the causation of this incident. Both Roger and Rob have seen the photos, correct?
I have.
Yeah. So what do you guys think? From seeing the photos without speculating on what potentially could have happened, does it look mechanical or maybe an overrun, landing distance issues with the pilots?
Well, first of all, if I remember, Freeport is a pretty long runway. Am I maybe I'm getting that confused with Nassau, but I actually am going to look that up as we speak right now. But I get a little skeptical whenever the news reports say they overran the runway.
Yeah, it's I do too. That's why I'm
right?
kind of, because I've seen these photos and it says they overran the runway, but when you look at it, it clearly has veered off to the side of the runway.
Exactly.
The runway is 10,900 feet long.
Okay. So that would be a runway excursion, right?
Exactly.
Am I correct? Maybe. I'm not an NTSB guy, but I think that's kind of the description it should have been. But reporters like to give their own thing. But yeah, so when I look at it, I kind of think that they had some kind of a malfunction because I don't know. I find it hard. I find this hard to believe to be pilot error. That's not, not to say that it was, it could have been, but, we know we've flown this airplane. Tony, I don't know how many hours you have, but you're probably just like me. You got over 7,000 hours. I can't even total it up. That's a really good airplane. And that landing gear on that airplane is awesome.
Yeah, it is.
The trailing link, the brakes on that thing were fantastic. You could land and have that plane slowed and stopped within 3,000 feet.
Yeah, with 25 people was it on board? That's nothing.
25, yeah. So they're coming from Miami, so we know the fuel load probably, unless they they had ferry fuel or whatever. Still, it's gonna be relatively light load. I think there had to be something mechanical, just my gut feeling, just the way that it looks. I didn't see anything weather-wise that would cause a plane to weather vane off the runway, crosswinds or anything like that. It didn't say they had bad weather. The weather seemed to be pretty nice. It had to be something mechanical. Could have been a blown tire.
Potentially landing and having a tire blow on you can cause extreme swerving. excessive
Yeah,
inputs
asymmetric
could
braking,
create
yep.
issue, asymmetric braking, a hydraulic failure of some kind that would cause braking on one side to be active and not the other. We
Right.
actually train extensively in the simulator on that aircraft for uncommanded nose wheel steering. And
yeah.
that's really potentially what I was thinking when I saw that it didn't look like an overrun to me, because it wasn't straight off the edge of the runway on the other side. From the photos that I
Right.
saw, it looked like it veered off the runway at about a 45-degree angle, and
Yeah.
it rested in the grass area between the runway and the taxiway. So to me, that's not an overrun.
The one thing that I remember, and it may not even be a factor, but just for some reason it popped up in my memory, was, remember the limitation on the thrust reversers? If it was wet or less than 7,000 feet or something like that, you had to use thrust reversers, or if, runway excursion was imminent,
You must.
you
We had
must
3
use,
categories, I believe. The time you must use the reversers, the times
Right.
you may use the
May use them.
reversers, and there are times where they took it out, but there were times where they didn't
Right.
want you to use the reversers.
Right.
Now,
Like,
anytime a runway excursion is imminent, absolutely you must max reverse. And that's what it was.
Right.
It was a time where you may use min and a time where you must use max.
Right. No
Um,
time could you use it in the intermediate position,
Right.
which that could also be a factor too. If they were, you know, had some kind of asymmetric condition going on, and they elected to use thrust reversers, and may not have, gotten them out symmetrically, or
True.
the engines didn't spool up symmetrically, which I think the FADEX kind of prevent that in that model. But
Yeah.
there's a
Now,
lot of things.
In my, you were asking earlier. I mean, I have 11,000 hours on the Embraer 145 fleet.
Yeah.
In
Jeez.
that time, 4.5 years as a IOE check airman, I've seen these kind of photos before, and 9 out of 10, unfortunately, it was a technique or a input from the pilots as a response to something that wasn't quite right that created the excursion.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to speculate to whether that's what happened here.
Yeah.
I've seen incidences where, for whatever reason, the parking brake was set in flight.
Oh yeah.
And they
I'm
forgot.
guilty of that in the simulator.
They forgot in the sim. Oh my! This is interesting. I might want to dive into this a little later.
It's actually a great, funny story. It will tell you later, but it's funny.
But there's an incident. There's a few actually incidences where, over at Sandpiper, I've heard of people. They were demonstrating a technique that was later prohibited on adjusting the hydraulic system from system 1 to system 2, because after time they would have a tendency to flow through a shuttle valve, and which wasn't supposed to happen, but it did. And so to balance the hydraulic system quantities, there's a technique you could use by alternating pedal pressure for the brakes and the emergency brake. And a particular flight crew did this in flight and forgot it up, and then they landed and blew all 4 mains.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that was it. I mean, the aircraft, basically all 4 tires, but they stayed on the runway because it happened at an airport that had a humongous runway. And
300-foot wide runway.
Potentially, could that be an issue here? We have no idea. We'll find out.
Yeah. And remember, the Embraer is a brake-by-wire and steer-by-wire system. So, electronically, there is, a potential for a computer failure in the steering system, and also in the, brake system, the brake, I forget what the BCU, brake control unit or whatever. All the little acronyms.
Steering control unit or something like that. Or,
there's a whole bunch of computer, populates the steer knob on the ICAS and all that. But, they could have had, there's so many things that could have gone wrong there. And we know that the Embraer has had in the past, and a long time ago, steering control unit problems. And they actually made a video that we had to watch. And like you said, we train for steer and op issues on takeoff and landing and stuff like that. But let's face it, if that's what they had, I know you, at least me, I know I didn't catch it in time the first time it happened to me in the sim.
Yeah.
And I went off the side of the runway, and then the instructor's like, aha, see what happened? Yeah, you should have just grabbed the the steer or not button and disconnected it and just used differential braking instead of reaching down there and grabbing this tiller, which that's your first instinct because you're going off the side of the runway.
Right. And Roger, you've got an extensive amount of hours on this aircraft as well, on the Embraer. What are your thoughts?
I do. I hate to speculate on stuff like this, on on what any potential causes are. It's admittedly the first thing that I thought of when I saw this was actually what you guys were just kind of starting to get into at the end. Was I do remember that there was some issues with the nose gear steering mechanism, and there is that trigger that's on the yoke to disable that nose gear steering. However, Rob, like you were just talking about, let's face it, that's one thing to not do it in the sim and then get it the second time. That's great. In the real world, how often if that thing goes off, uncommanded nose wheel steering, I believe is the emergency memory action checklist. If that goes off at 80 knots, there's no way that you're going to be able to click that trigger before you're already in the dirt.
Yeah.
So, that's my first thought, but at the same time, unfortunately, statistics also say that it's usually our fault. Mm-hmm. Not to say that it is. I just don't want to speculate just based off of some pictures. I remember the nose gear steering, the uncommanded nose wheel steering, but who knows? Everybody's okay. That's the most important thing. Yeah. And Amen. Hopefully with both of these accidents or incidents, when those reports do come out, we will all have something to take away and learn from them. And, unfortunately, maybe learn from the mistakes of others. And so the rest of us don't need to make the same mistakes in order to gain the same understandings. But like I say, most importantly, thankfully, everybody's okay in both of these incidents. And we'll take something away from it moving forward.
I remember also on that airplane when you grease the landing, and we all had those landings on that airplane at one point in time. When you barely touched down to the point where the plane didn't even know it was on the ground, you'd get that ICAS message populate. Ding! Landing gear, air ground fail. Was it landing gear, air ground fail?
Air ground disagree.
I think air ground disagree. That's what it was.
I never had that problem.
Oh, boy. Oh, man.
You got to leave your mark on every runway.
I wanted to let everybody know we were there.
Boof. We're here.
Right? When you come in and you just grease that thing on there, you'd get this message populate. And basically it's saying, I don't know if you're on the ground or if you're in the air.
Yeah.
So your spoilers wouldn't come up. Your thrust reversers wouldn't deploy. And possibly then I don't know if the nose wheel steering kicks in at that point. But,
Yeah. That aircraft had, I think, five landing gear proximity switches and 2 on each mains and 1 on the nose gear.
That's right.
And so if you got this super light landing where maybe one side of the main gear thinks it's on the ground, but the other thinks it's in the air, now the system is saying, hey, wait a minute, are you on the ground or are you in the air? So there's a problem. That immediately would go away. But you've opened the door to a potentially new issue that we can sit here, and again, this is just a topic for discussion. We're not going to speculate of what actually happened on this flight that we're talking about here. We'll reserve that for the experts to determine and document, and then we'll keep an eye on it for a future show when we do get the answer, and we'll talk about it then. But when that happens, that potentially could be an error that you get on landing, on rollout, that doesn't go away because there's actually a mechanical fault. And if you get that and the aircraft doesn't know if it's on the ground or in the air, then you're not going to have thrust reverser deployment. They'll be locked out. You're not going to have anti-skid and anti-locking. You will not have nose wheel steering. And you will not have ground spoiler deployment. So...
a lot of
it's
things
potentially this could have happened this is just another issue that we're sitting here talking about for that model aircraft, that if there was a mechanical issue with the proximity switches on the main gear, and that is in fact what happened, that aircraft would have been very difficult to control. And so a response from a pilot, from my experience on that aircraft, would be, now you're like, first off, okay, what's it doing? Why am I not slowing? Why can't I get these thrust reversers out? And the airplane's saying, ding, air ground disagree. And you're like, well, why don't these thrust reversers come out? I know it dinged at me, but why won't these thrust reversers come out?
Yeah.
And if you focus all your energy on here and not pull back and get a global assessment of what's actually happening, now you're slamming on the brakes at high speed. You don't have anti-skid or anti-lock in this scenario, and you would lock up the tires, in which case you'd get reverberated rubber hydroplaning, where the tires get hot and they're on top of, you're burning rubber, and there's a hot rubber between you and the ground.
Yeah.
Now you're hydroplaning off there potentially, and that that really could be an issue here. We don't know,
and we haven't even talked about it. I'm just brainstorming here too. But there could have been FOD on the runway. There could have been some kind of debris or some kind of bird strike that they didn't know about, that disabled the air ground system. We'll never know. I mean,
they have dogs in the Bahamas and in the islands, and I've seen a few dogs on rollout near the runway. Wild dogs. And when you say that, we're not kidding, folks. When you land in the Bahamas, you'll never know what you'll see crossing the runway. There's a dingo down here. How did a dingo get in the Bahamas?
Yeah. I mean, it's safe and everything, but the wildlife and it's different. It's a different country, and it's like that in different countries around the world. They have some places where highways go across a runway. But and the other thing too is the talking about the Central Wisconsin incident, and now this one here in Freeport. One thing that came across my mind just momentarily was, the schedules, the flying schedules are severe, cut in half, maybe 10, 20. So the amount of traffic going in and out of these airports are, almost, very low compared to what they used to be. So Central Wisconsin, that particular incident, they may not have had some of the reports that they would normally get from PIREPs, from pilots coming in prior to that landing with, the runway conditions and stuff like that. And, did the airport do their job in, treating the runway before the aircraft came in and landed? I mean, there's so many things that are so out of the ordinary as it is, that it's so hard to draw any conclusion, but just speculating, like Roger said, we'll never know until, we hate to speculate, but these are all the things that you kind of go through as a pilot, just wondering, what went wrong? Did they do it wrong? Was the plane, did the plane have a problem? Was it weather? Gosh, we really want to know right away, because that just drives you, to get better, as you want to learn. Like Roger said, hopefully you learn from other people's mistakes, and hopefully they fix the problem before somebody else gets hurt. Yeah. And that's what we're doing here, ladies and gentlemen. We are just looking at the potential issues. Now that we've had this discussion, I know that if something like this were to happen on the line here in the next few months, well, we just had this discussion about the event, the situation, and maybe if it happens to me out on the flight line, I might just be a little bit more prepared and a little bit more aware that lag time between the event occurrence and the response, that what's it doing, time, that human factor. Maybe I can shorten that down by a few milliseconds. And those few milliseconds might lead me to a correct response in order to maintain a safe and professional
flight atmosphere on the flight deck. So that's why we talk about these things. This show is about the journey in today's aviator. This is not about, aircraft accidents, but we're talking about some of the things that affect us, affect our journeys, and affect how we operate. But it doesn't always go wrong. Sometimes mechanical errors happen on the flight line and it becomes a successful flight. And we will discuss this and a whole lot more right after the break. Again this week, there's never two without three is what my mom always used to say. A third incident, this time at the parent company from American Eagle. This one happened on American Airlines on an Airbus A320. Again, from simplyflying.com on an article that was published on October 24th from Graham Snellgrove. He wrote on an article called Multiple Hydraulic Failures Strike American Airlines Airbus 320. The 320 was at the center of a potential drama yesterday after the flight crew reported multiple hydraulic failures. The flight from Syracuse to Charlotte spent 45 minutes in the air before returning to its departing airport and landed safely with emergency services standing by. As reported by the Aviation Herald on October 23rd, the AA Airbus 320-200 suffered multiple hydraulic failures, forcing it to return to its origin airport. The aircraft registration that they gave was operating as Flight AA 530 from Syracuse to Charlotte, and it had 91 people on board. It had departed runway 10 from Syracuse, and it climbed out normally. At 10,000 feet, the crew stopped the climb and requested to return to Syracuse, reporting that they were experiencing a problem which they were working on. Subsequently, the crew advised that they had multiple hydraulic failures and would need some time to set up for landing. The aircraft entered a holding pattern at 7,000 feet while working through some checklists. The crew advised air traffic control that they would have no nose-wheel steering on landing, and about 45 minutes after departure, the crew landed the aircraft safely on Syracuse's runway 10. They stopped on the runway, confirming that they had no nose-wheel steering and would need to be towed from the runway. While advising that they had no fumes on board, they asked emergency services to check the airplane for any leaks. And the article goes on indicating that they reached out to the spokespeople and didn't have a comment yet. But this is just a great example of just professionalism that they have over there at American Airlines. They handled the situation. They stopped climbing at 10,000 feet. Clearly, they had some kind of indication in the flight deck that they had multiple hydraulic system failures. The Airbus 320 has 3 systems. They color code them. The Airbus engineers decided that by color coding them, it made it simple, the yellow, the green, and the blue hydraulic systems. To have multiple failures is definitely an emergency. If you lose one hydraulic system, the plane's going to operate normally. You're just going to have to make some adjustments, and you're going to land at the nearest suitable airport, even with one hydraulic failure. This situation, they had 2, which is very rare. Especially for an Airbus design like this, to have 2 system failures. And the fact that they asked if there were any leaks tells me that it was a quantity issue of hydraulic fluid, because they would have had a major leak. Why 2 systems would fail, I don't know. But they landed without incident. They knew they were not going to have the nose wheel steering. They took the time to go into a holding pattern so that they can run through all the checklists. That now you have to figure out not just what you have lost in terms of systems on a scenario like this, but you also have to figure out landing distance computations. You have to figure out runway requirements. How much runway do I need in this scenario?
From what I remember, all the aircraft that I've flown, anytime there's a hydraulic problem or failure, the checklist is extensive. every
Very.
aircraft. Very extensive. Yep. Yeah, just pages and pages and computations, and thank God for the EFBs, because you could just click the hyperlinks and go from page to page that you need to go to, and it brings you right where you where you need to be for your landing computations and what if scenarios and
Yep. As a matter
follow
of
on actions
fact,
and all stuff.
while you're saying this, I just thought, well, let's take a look to see how long it would take me to pull this up, and I pulled it up in my EFB. Now, on our flight deck in the Airbus, we are actually, each pilot is required to have a paper copy of the QRH. What's a QRH? The Quick Reference Handbook. This is where all our emergency procedures are. So if both electronic flight bags completely are destroyed or don't work, you always have a paper copy. Okay. And to have a hydraulic system failure, to have two of them fail, is a big deal. And so let's take a look. We have the blue system, the green system, and the yellow system. Now, what the specific failure is, I don't know, because it doesn't just say fail. There's low pressure, low pump level, overheat. I mean, there's so many different scenarios. But let's just take a look at one of them. Now, Rob, like you said, it's extensive. And this is just the quick reference stuff. It's like 3 pages long. After you run the quick reference material, you need to go into the EFB, pull up the AOM, which is Aircraft Operating Manual. At least that's what Legacy Airlines calls it. And then you go through even more checklists. And then that's just the checklist for the failure. Now you have checklists. You have to run the non-routine landing distance considerations. You have to run other apps to make sure you have enough runway length. Now, the pilot that's flying the airplane is talking on the radio, and the pilot that's monitoring, which is usually the captain, they're going through all these checklists. They're figuring out all these computations. They're notifying dispatch. They're notifying the flight attendants. They're figuring out what kind of emergency services they're going to require, if they're going to be able to get the airplane off the runway or not. And all of this comes into play. You mentioned being busy after a flight management flight plan accidentally got erased on an approach, which, I mean, that's like, it gets quick. You're pushing buttons fast, and you don't want to make an error and make it worse. So you want to make sure that you're methodical and you fix the situation, and you guys were able to do it relatively quick, but it got busy. Can you imagine how busy it's going to get now? Where
it's crazy.
So they did absolutely the right thing.
I was looking at the 737 QRH, and there's anywhere from 6 to 11 pages of checklist items you got to go through, depending on if it's a system A, system B, or loss of both systems. So it's quite extensive.
And here on the Airbus, I mean, they go from the configuration that you need for landing. Are you going to have to use the landing gear gravity extension? According to the one I looked up, it was required. So here you are in the cockpit, and someone's turning that crank, and you're turning the crank until the gear's down and locked, and you have an indication. It indicates that you have sluggish aircraft. You're going to go into direct law, pitch and roll. Once the gear comes down, slat and flap configurations, you have to adjust your max speed by so many knots. You have fuel consumption's obviously going to be increased. Well, if you're at 10,000 feet, you're pretty close to the airport, so that's not going to be too bad. You have to go through another checklist. There's non-routine landing, the landing distance procedures you have to apply. Then on to the third page, you get into, well, what flap configuration are you in? And now we have to figure out your approach speed. Dependent on that, are the flaps jammed? Are they slow? All these considerations you have to go through all the way down until...
and if you were probably going cross country too, like Philly to LA, and you just taken off, you'd probably close to being close to overweight for a landing, return to landing. And this doesn't quite necessitate, at least of yet, an immediate return. But unless you're out of control, obviously you're going to have to come right back. But so you there's things you got to think about. You don't want to break the airplane just because you did an overweight landing too.
Sure.
So a lot of things, and all the weight to stop it.
Yeah, and all this that we're talking about here, the American family is not the only one. UPS, an A300 cargo plane, suffered a hydraulic failure back on October 13th while preparing to land at the Louisville, Kentucky airport, and the crew had to lower the landing gear manually. And after hard landing, the brakes locked up, causing several tires to blow out. And then back in September, a Mirage Airlines A320 operating a domestic flight from Tehran to Kermanshah was twice forced to return to Tehran after indications of hydraulic leaks. So, and it goes on, this article, with some of the others that have been reported not so long ago. So, these are pretty serious mechanical errors or issues, I should say. And, great job. Hats off to the crew of all of these flights, because until we know otherwise, good job. Not anyone that I've read here has been injured. Everyone, passengers and crew alike. So great job to all the crew members that have handled these accidents, these mechanical issues or whatnot. And it really is a testament to our training at this point. So,
job well done.
Yeah, absolutely. Roger, do you have anything to add?
Not in particular. I mean, my big question is, was that before or after the flight progress report had come in?
Those distractions can really screw you up,
That's
buddy.
Right. And in the end, after having said all that, we talked about distractions. We talked about what pilots, do on the flight deck. This is why pilots are there. This is why pilots, what pilots in the end are paid to do. It's not to fly you from point A to point B on any regular routine flight. It's for when things don't go quite the way they're supposed to, because it happens more than people realize. It's just you never hear about it. Yeah. And that's a good thing. You don't hear about it because it's handled appropriately, it's handled safely, and then we fix the problem after everyone's back on the ground. But this is really in the end, this is what it means to be a pilot, is to handle those situations when they become abnormal.
Well, I was going to say, it just goes to show you also how well built the airplanes are with redundancy. The airplanes are double, triple, sometimes quadruple redundant systems on them, and you can the airplane can suffer these kind of failures, system failures, and still land safely. But it does take a highly trained crew and a lot of simulator time, and obviously knowledge of the QRH and aircraft systems to get the airplane back on the ground safely. And that's what they did.
Yeah.
So job well done. Kudos.
Yeah. And, and the discussion of, we're going to go to a single pilot operations. That's what the airlines want, so they can cut costs, and that's what the FAA is pushing for. And look at Tesla; they have self-driving cars. All they're going to have is one qualified pilot and a relief pilot, just so that one, if that one has to go to the bathroom, that's not even qualified to land the airplane. No, that's not going to happen because of countless scenarios like these, where even two people have a workload that has potentially, grown by a factor of 10. It's crazy to think that one person can handle all that.
And here's a conspiracy theorist in me, and with guys like Edward Snowden in the world who can hack into anything in the world, they could probably hack into the operating system of that airplane and turn it into a weapon of mass destruction at any time, without any human intervention.
Now,
if there's no pilots up there.
Well, if there's no,
Call me crazy, but that can happen.
There's always this running joke of, they're in the air and the captain makes the PA once they level off, and, they verify that the seatbelt sign, is it a good idea to turn it off or not? They check with ATC, what are the ride reports like? And so the captain makes the PA, and the dread is that someday soon, those poor passengers back there are going to go, "Hey, this is your captain, Rob. I'm reporting to you live. I'm working from home today. This aircraft is being flown via remote satellite, and don't worry, you're all perfectly fine. There's two chimpanzees up front that know what to do in case the signal is lost." Like, come on. But seriously, these incidences are very task saturated, and anytime a successful outcome comes out of it, we just have to recognize them as a job well done. I had an incident a few weeks ago that I had been meaning to mention, but we just hadn't had the opportunity. Talk about task saturation. Now, we didn't have a mechanical, okay? But this was an incident. I was flying with a wonderful captain. She had a long history of aviation. Her story is actually phenomenal. I'm trying to get her to come on the show to talk to us about her journey in both the Air Force and over at Legacy Airlines and everything else. But we were flying together. We got along relatively well. On our very first leg, it was an LA to DCA flight. And about halfway through the flight, we're in the middle of a conversation, performing our duties, and we get a call from the back from the flight attendant. And flight attendant, purser, the number one flight attendant that's in charge, calls us and goes, "Hey, we got a passenger back here that we're kind of having an issue with." It's like, okay, all of a sudden, we sit up straight in our seats and get our pens out and our scratch paper and like, okay, what's going on? Let's document this. Let's time to get to action. Well, this passenger, I think, is having drug withdrawals. We're like, oh, great. Here we are halfway through this 5-hour flight, 37,000 feet. And this is not what we want to hear. So we're like, okay, what's happening? It's like, well, 22-year-old male. He said he took some kind of prescription drugs that he's trying to wean himself off of, and he's not feeling well. He's back here in the galley, hunched over on the floor. We're trying to give him water, and but he's just not having it. He's not very responsive. We're not sure, how this is going to escalate. And so the captain's like, well, okay, have you called for a physician in the cabin yet? Do you see if there's a doctor on board? And like, yeah, we're doing that right now as I'm talking to you. And it looks like someone got up. Let me call you back and let you know what's going on. So a couple minutes go by, and meanwhile, our wheels are turning. We're like, okay, if we have to divert for medical, where are we going to go? So I'm already looking up close airports that we service that we could potentially go to in case this escalates quickly. Now we're thinking, okay, if he's on a drug withdrawal, could this person become violent? And if so, what are the protocols and what are the security procedures that we are required to follow, and all that stuff. So we're looking at that. Meanwhile, the captain and I are having this discussion. Now the flight attendant calls us back and says, well, we have a cardiologist on board, and they took vitals. Here are the vitals. I have a form that I'm filling out that we're required to fill out. What do you want to do? And so we're like, well, what does the doctor say? Does the doctor say that we should divert and land? And she said, no, the doctor says he's fine. We're going to give him some aspirin. He's going through withdrawals. He's stable. And if we can just get him in his seat, maybe we can get him to ride it out. So now we have to get a physician on call involved, and now we get very, very busy. So this passenger's issues are going up, they're going down, he's getting better, he's getting worse, and after a few minutes, finally, one of our federal air marshals got involved. He identified himself. This is a very rare thing, and he spoke with the captain and I, and through the intercom, and said, yeah, I went ahead and identified myself. I'm actually an EMT trainer for the program, and I'm going to go ahead and assess the situation. I don't think he's a problem. He's just going through withdrawals, and he's stable. And you do have Narcan on board, which is the pharmaceutical that you give someone who is overdosing. He goes, if I need to administer it, then we'll definitely need to get this airplane on the ground. He says, but at this time, I've been watching him, and it's been now 20 minutes that he's been creating a scene, and it just seems like he's not comfortable, but he's stable. All his vitals are stable. So, okay, we elected to continue. Well, as we're getting closer, the communication's going back and forth periodically, and we were able to get the passenger to have a seat next to his friend that he was traveling with, his travel companion. And once he kind of got to the point where he knew where he was and he was back in his seat, and the federal air marshal, identified himself. Now he's talking to a cop. He's not happy. And now the PA happens from the flight deck. The captain makes this PA, very professional, saying, we have an ill passenger. We are going to continue at this point. The passenger seems to be stable, so we're going to continue. But when we land, we're going to park at the gate. I want everyone to stay in their seats. We're going to allow the paramedics to come on board the aircraft and assess the situation. Once they give me the all clear, we will go ahead and turn off the seatbelt sign, and you may continue with your deplaning procedures that we have now, these post-COVID procedures where we let one row up at a time and whatnot. At least that's what we're doing at Legacy. And that scared him. And so he was like, all of a sudden he felt better. And he went to the bathroom a few times. And the fam was like keeping an eye on him, like, okay, why do you go to the bathroom twice in 10 minutes? The assumption was he was dumping stuff in the lab. So once we got on the ground, we parked at the gate, the paramedics came on board, and we got a knock on the door. And we're like, oh, that was quick. So we open the door, and paramedics go, you're all clear. And the captain's like, you got him off already? And they refused medical treatment. Both of them bolted as soon as the door opened. They're gone. There's nothing we can do. They refused medical treatment. And like, okay. So all of that crazy drama, all of those 2.5 hours of continuously going, okay, where am I? If I have to divert, where am I going to divert?
Distraction, yeah.
The workload was tremendous. The communication between the cockpit and the cabin was intensive for a flight. We had so many people involved, so many agencies involved. Now, they didn't really do anything incorrect. There was no grounds for law enforcement to be present. We actually had law enforcement on the airplane. What is there to do? But these are some of the things that can happen. So a distraction, rushing to get on the ground, a workload saturation, all these things fall into what we've been talking about now for over an hour and a half. Of threat and error management, the ABC model, CRM, distractions on the flight deck, potentially, things that could go wrong because you're distracted. And the incidences that led to incidents or accidents that potentially could be caused from distraction or mechanical, we don't know. But all of these things are kind of why we get paid the big bucks, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Intriguing.
Roger suddenly his ears went up like, what, you get paid?
I was gonna say, that's Legacy must be good to you guys.
They stopped paying us in like paper money, then now it's just gold bullion.
Bitcoin.
Oh, don't get me started
Bitcoin.
with Bitcoin. Oh my God.
Somewhat unrelated. Just let me get this straight. There was a cardiologist on board who assessed patient, and a federal air marshal decided he was going to decide whether he was going to administer Narcan or was going to assess the situation and overstep the cardiologist.
Well, the cardiologist was a passenger that was flying. The cardiologist said, hey, man, he seems stable. I don't recommend it. I'm going to go back to my seat kind of thing. Like they stay until, but then the fam was like, this poor passenger, they gave their assessment. He was qualified as an EMT to also give the assessment. We had communications with the physician on call, which is through dispatch. The physician on call said, yeah, the stats you're giving me, the guy's stable. There's no reason. The information you've handed, the assessment of all three of these medical professionals. So, the passenger, thank you for your help. We appreciate you. You go back to your seat. If we need you, we'll call you. So that frees that person from liability and the discomfort of, hey, I'm on a flight trying to go visit Nana, and now I'm sitting here, over a patient who is stable. So that's why the fam got involved. Afterwards, we all had a conversation. talking about how these things happen and what can you do? And we thank them for all the paramedics, the fire department that was there, the FAMs, and the flight attendants. We sat there and all had a little conversation after the flight, and everybody was off the plane and saying what a great job everybody did in the situation. Now, some young kids, they popped a couple pills before getting on a flight. Illegal. And, they're tripping.
Were they roofies?
Illegal.
I don't know why they call them roofies, because you're always on the floor. But
what do you take? The red pill? Or is it the blue pill?
The one with little Mitsubishi logo on it.
You take the blue pill. The story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill. You stay in Wonderland. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
Yeah. You guys have had any incidences like that?
I had one when we got to the gate. I mean, we landed, set the park and brake, checklist complete, everybody deplane, waiting on one last passenger to get off, and the flight attendant's like, hey, I think we need this guy needs medical attention. He's not responsive. I mean, he's conscious, but he's not responsive. And he's kind of moaning and groaning back there. And so, like, really? Let me go take a look. So I go look back there, and the guy's like, and I was like, yeah, he looks like he's on some kind of drugs or something like that. So, yeah, exactly. So I went back to the cockpit and got on company radio and, said, hey, we need medical assistance for passenger. And they were there within like 5 minutes. And that's all we heard. I mean, nothing crazy. I was deadheading on a flight a few months ago. It was about a month ago. And there was a passenger that was having some kind of health issues. Flight attendants took out the oxygen, and thankfully there was a nurse who was sitting right next to them, just happened to be sitting right next to them, identified themselves and assisted the flight attendants with everything. And that turned into a little bit of a fiasco for about 15 to 20 minutes of the flight attendants' time, because they were attending just to that one I mean, not that there's much going on these days in the cabin of an aircraft. They're not doing services or anything like that. So this definitely took the attention of pretty much all the flight attendants on board. And I did see them taking out their what do they call it, the crew phone app, to call the physician on call and relay information. Of course, they did everything. They did everything by the book, as far as I can see. It was good. It was really neat to watch them in action. They do a really good job up there. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, hands off to flight attendants. They do a lot more back there than we often give them credit to, and I don't forget that. Roger, did you have an incident you wanted to talk about?
No. The only thing I've really actually seen was just like Rob was talking about, was actually I was commuting on a flight, and it turned, and I don't actually even know what ended up happening. I do know that there was quite the commotion there for probably 15 or 20 minutes, and I was wondering if I was going to make it home on time, and the flight continued on, so they must have resolved it. But other than that, unfortunately, I've not ever had anything on any flight that I've been on that's had to be addressed with any sort of emergency like that.
Well, on the show, let's wrap it up today with a movie review. Now, I've gotten some feedback from multiple viewers and listeners to the podcast that they really enjoyed, I don't know, 20 or 30 episodes ago, where we actually did a little review of aviation films. And most pilots, are kind of into aviation films, like to talk about it. And most of the time we make fun of them because they're highly inaccurate and, purely Hollywood entertainment. The movie Flight comes to mind. Denzel does an excellent job in acting. And no, I don't wake up next to coworkers after doing some illegal drugs.
Some blow and stuff like that.
Come on, for real. But these and the sequences on that film where the plane goes inverted, it's not even a real airplane, it's all CGI. It's like a McDonnell Douglas Boeing Airbus airplane. But I can remember weeks after seeing that film, my friends and family would call me and say, "Is that real? Can you really fly an airplane upside down? And do you guys really get all stoned and stuff on the overnights?" And come on, it's Hollywood, but it's a great story, loosely based on events that have happened in the past and aviators that have gone through similar situations.
And how long has Sleeping Beauty been out?
26 minutes. We're going to start descending any second now.
Well, it looks like you'll need to wake him up.
Southjet 227, Atlanta Center, descend and maintain flight level 300.
Descend and maintain flight level 300.
So it was a really good film. But, Rob, you mentioned you recently saw a film that I've been meaning to catch. We've talked about this on the flight deck, certain flights, and this is the new flight on Amazon Prime. Flight was 7500. 7,500 for those in the aviation community. We all know what that means. That's the transponder code
distress
where we squawk 7,500. So, and that means, hey, we're being hijacked. Yeah. So what did you think of that film?
Well, it was interesting. I was sitting around, one evening looking for something to watch, and this kept popping up in, my suggestion feed. So finally I clicked on it and started watching it. And from the very beginning, I was hooked because the movie, they do a really good job of replicating the procedures and the nuances we go through in the cockpit for pre-flights, and the interactions you have with your coworkers, your captain, and your flight attendants. And so from as soon as that started happening, it kind of caught my attention, because I'm like, hey, these guys are doing a really good job of starting this movie out. I hope the rest of the movie is true to that kind of realism. But let me just read it here. This is a Amazon Prime movie. It's called 7,500, and the description is: when terrorists try to seize control of a Berlin to Paris flight, a soft-spoken young American co-pilot struggles to save the lives of the passengers. This is director Patrick Vollrath, and starring Joseph Gordon-Levitt. So you have seen him in a couple of movies. He's really good. Yep. Omid Memar. I don't know who that is. Sorry. Carlo Kitzlinger is one of the other actors. So basically, the movie is a movie about a hijacking and how this pilot handles the situation. And it is crazy, because obviously we're all familiar with September 11th. That's a day which, if you're around that September 11th, vividly in your memory what happened that day, where terrorists took over 4 airplanes and crashed them into the World Trade Center and the Pentagon in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. And this movie just really, really opened your eyes to a cinematic presentation of a hijacking. And all these things that they were going through are plausible stuff. I mean, it was just really, really well done. And we were kind of joking about it leading up to the this conversation was, how'd the movie end? Well, it just ends. It really ends. And I'll leave it hanging there. You really just have to watch the movie to see how it ends. And you're kind of laugh, next time we talk, if you watch the movie, you're going to laugh and say, yeah, you're right. It kind of just ends.
Yeah. But that's been the consensus of the people that I've spoken with, because anytime an aviation film reaches like a Hollywood stage like this one has, we talk about it on the flight deck. Hey, did you see that movie? Did you see that? What'd you think?
Yeah.
But I've also heard this from multiple people, that it was a very accurate depiction of what we go through on these kind of situations. Now, as aviators, we're bound to secrecy from the FAA and the NTSB on the security protocols, so we would never go against that and disclose the specifics. But anyone that logically can say, okay, well, clearly there's protocol in place, and this movie does scratch the surface on that. I am going to watch this film and let you know what I think. And and Roger was indicating that he hadn't seen it either, right, Roger?
I have not seen it.
Yeah, so we'll take a look and get back to you, and maybe
on my next overnight.
give our listeners a little 2 cents on what we did. But you liked it. Is that what you're saying?
I liked it. Yeah, I liked it. The movie's not going to get any Academy Awards, I don't think. I mean, it's just not that kind of movie. And as you could see by the ratings on the Prime, platform there, I think it only got 3 stars, 2 stars, 3 stars.
Yeah.
So it's it's not huge, but I think for the audience that they're looking for, probably viewers like us who can relate to these situations. Well, I wouldn't say can relate, but can imagine these situations happening to our I mean, come on, every pilot after September 11th has gone through scenarios after scenario after scenario in your head about hijacking and how you would handle it.
Right.
And this is just a really good, Hollywood rendition of how, this particular guy handles this situation. And I don't even remember. Yeah, I don't think it is, but I don't know. I don't think it was based on any kind of true events. I don't remember it saying that, and I think it would have said it in the description.
Yeah.
So it's not based on true events, but still, he's flying an Airbus, so that right there is already in your, probably piques your curiosity a little bit there, and how he he handles that. You probably you'll see when he goes through the taxi flow. It's quite similar to what I see the Airbus guys do when I'm jump seating in their cockpit. So it's pretty neat.
Yeah,
I think you guys will like it.
And even though the reviews have been a little harsh on this, because I have kind of heard the reviews and I thought, well, yeah, I want to watch it. But then I kind of saw the reviews and I thought, I'll put it on the list, but it's not a priority. But
the reviews are kind of like polls, man. You can't believe them.
Yeah, I mean, I think because of what we do, I know Brian Tolerico. I hope I'm saying that right. Tolerico from the Roger and Ebert.com. They only gave him 2 stars for this film, but they did indicate on their website that within the first 15 minutes there's an action sequence that really kind of gets you hooked into it. Unfortunately, what they mentioned is like towards the end of the film, it's kind of a lot left to be desired. But the acting from Gordon Levitt is actually what holds this movie.
Yeah, to me, and now that you mentioned that, what kind of, if you're a non-aviator and you're watching this movie, the beginning of the movie will be slow because there is really not a lot going on that's like, wow, I gotta watch this. You know what I mean? There's just nothing that catches you in the opening scene of this movie. But if you're an aviator, especially if you've been in a 121 environment, it's the other way around. The interactions are what we see every day, and your curiosity is going to be like, hey, that's kind of how we do it. Let's see what, where it leads to next. And, you're kind of anticipating, okay, this is going to happen. Oh, yep, it happens. And, okay, this is what they say. Okay. Checklist. All right. Yeah. Any threats going forward? Yeah. All right. Briefing the departure, the taxi out, everything's happening just like we do it in the cockpit. And so from an aviator point of view, you're going to watch this movie and you're going to kind of hang on every minute of the first 15 minutes of the movie, because it's right down your alley as far as, your interests. So I think it's going to be a good movie for you.
Yeah. The film that always comes to mind when I think of a really impressive display of accuracy is actually an animated film called Incredibles and Incredibles 2. Do you remember the scene where the mom is talking to she's flying the jet and she's talking to ATC and it's like, oh my God, that was really accurate. Let me see if I can find it real quick.
Got it queued up there.
India Golf 909 transmitting in the blind guard. Disengage, repeat, disengage.
Yeah, the scene where the mom talks to ATC in the airplane was very accurate, and I always was impressed with that. I always thought, wow, this cartoon got it right. But it's really not a surprise because the character is actually played by Holly Hunter. Holly Hunter, who was in the film Always, where she played a pilot for firefighting squadron. Wonderful movie. One of Audrey Hepburn's last films, I believe, the movie Always. Great film for aviators to watch, which was actually what I just discovered, a remake of a film called A Guy Named Joe, with an MGM film with Spencer Tracy and Irene Dunne. And it's basically the film in that era, which was remade to fit a storyline from the 90s, which was the movie Always, with Holly Hunter. So not surprising that she got it right.
Cool. I'll check that one out. Always. Rent on Amazon Prime for $3.99 in HD.
Yeah, that's Richard Dreyfuss too. It's great movie. Over the last few weeks, we on the airline side of the industry have seen many of our fellow pilots, flight attendants, and coworkers say their goodbyes. Here in the United States, since the Payroll Protection Program, or the CARES Act, expired on October 1st, the first wave of furloughed pilots have been forced to place themselves on unemployment lines. Not far behind that initial wave of employees is a second wave, involuntarily poised to join their brothers and sisters, as the second round of furloughs are scheduled to happen here on November 1st. This devastating reality our industry has been affected by is often masked by the outstanding professionalism and dedication of many of today's professional aviators. Make no mistake, these are some very dark days for our industry. To our brothers and sisters that have been or will soon be forced to temporarily take a bench, we at Squawk Ident truly believe that there is hope for payroll protections just around the corner. For those aviators that have been fortunate enough to keep their jobs, whether it's with or without significant reductions in work schedules or payroll protections, they too have felt the many burdens that this pandemic has created. Some are dealing with significant financial strains, while others are dealing with major changes to flight schedules, all while watching friends and colleagues, and in some cases family members, struggling to figure out how they are going to make it all work. While handling the multitude of distractions out there, we still have to show up to work with clear heads, ready for what might lie ahead. Staying focused, following SOPs, and being able to compartmentalize the task at hand from every other distraction is what sets us professional pilots apart. Do not allow distractions on the flight deck to make you a headline. Well, that wraps up show number 60. You know, I have been having a wonderful time having this discussion with you fine gentlemen, you know, talking about aviation, work, contracts, work, unemployment lines. You know, it does help. It helps me. I've received some relatively positive feedback from a lot of our listeners, indicating that listening to the show does help them, especially on their commutes into work. And so we want to hear from you. If you're enjoying Squawk Ident, we encourage you to visit our website at aviatortony.com. If you find value in our show, we would just like to invite you, if you're so inclined, to contribute to the Squawk Ident podcast right there on the homepage. There's a link that'll take you to a site where you can contribute financially to the show, where that'll help us keep this podcast going. It's not easy getting equipment and keeping subscriptions going, and it does cost some money. This is a wonderful way to get the word out about the journey of today's aviator, and we'd like to keep it going for as long as we financially can. So anything that you can do, especially now, would help. If you can't, totally understandable. We just hope you enjoy the show. Another thing you can do is leave us some feedback, whether that's audio feedback right there on the website, or you can send us an email. You can reach out to us on social media as well. On the Facebook pages, you can find us at Squawk Ident Podcast. The same goes for Instagram. On YouTube, you can check out our channel, and on Twitter, just search Aviator Tony and Squawk Ident. We encourage you to support us on YouTube with a like, a subscribe, and a share. There you can see short video clips from the podcast. In closing, I'd like to say thank you for taking the time to listen to these grateful aviators. Keep the dirty side down out there, be safe, look out for those distractions, and take care of each other. See you guys. Bye.
All right. Have a good one. Good show, Tony. See you later, Roger.
Have a good one, guys.
Thanks, guys. Good show.